across the blue swells of the Caribbean. Southward, past Puerto Rico, beyond the Lesser Antilles. Southward over the equator, some 650 miles westward from Trinidad, on the same 20th meridian, the little seaport of Vitória scarcely makes a dent in the profile of Brazil. Yet ships from the seven seas drop anchor here to take on great cargoes of iron ore. Iron ore so rich it resembles the pure metal. Vast quantities of iron ore, transported to the seacoast by rail from virtually unlimited deposits, lying beyond the frontiers of the jungle, deep within the vast interior of Brazil. Iron ore for the mills of Gary and Pittsburgh. Iron ore for Southampton, Manchester, and Liverpool. Iron ore for the world. At the loading docks in Vitória, this rich mineral flows into the gaping holes of stout ocean-going vessels, into the channels of world trade, into the production of cars, steel girders, locomotives along the stretch leading into the high interior country. Despite their primitive methods, the sheer number of men and mule carts moved immense quantities of earth and stone. These methods, in fact, are still in vogue for maintenance work and unhurried construction. At points along the line where washouts were apt to occur during wet weather, the lengthening right-of-way was ballasted with rock, broken by sledgehammer crews and distributed by small rail cars. Season after season passed, and the steel rails were pushed onward up the long course of the Rio Doce toward far-distant Cali Mountain. The railroad penetrated a country of varied landscapes, scenes of wild grasses, rich tropical vegetation, rugged hills and rushing streams, opening not only a way through jungle growth and mountain passes, but a whole new territory in which man could establish his industries, develop his agriculture, and pursue his explorations. Community life flourished along the river as towns and villages sprang up to mark the progress of the new iron horse up through the valleys. The railroad provided employment, direct and indirect, for thousands of workers and established a flourishing new way of life in a region previously isolated from the rest of the world, yet with no change of style from the birthday suit for juvenile sunbathing. Passenger service between Vitória and the newly established towns was a boon to the growth and prosperity of the awakened backcountry. The new road, originally planned to unlock the hidden mineral riches of the interior, was becoming a vital civilizing factor in an area ready for development. The rich alluvial soils along the Rio Doce invited agriculture. Highly productive farms now are in evidence all along the course of the big stream. Harvested coffee, the main commercial crop of the region, is delivered by mule pack trains, river boats, and barges to convenient loading points along the railroad. As coffee production increased up the valleys of streams tributary to the Rio Doce, increasing tonnages of Brazil's most famous commodity were delivered to railroad terminal points along the system for transshipment by way of Vitória to the coffee markets of the world. Herds of Cebu cattle, noted for their rugged resistance to tropical diseases and equatorial conditions, dotted the hills looking down on the valley. These welcome inhabitants yielded their daily gallons to help meet the burgeoning demand for staple foods in the growing communities. The sturdy animals not only provided milk and meat for human consumption, but in addition were trained and hardened to serve as beasts of burden. Long strings of oxen provided the power behind, or rather in front of, an expanding production of hardwood timber. Huge hardwood logs were hauled down from the wooded hills above the valley to numerous loading points along the new right-of-way. There, they were loaded onto flat cars and shipped by rail to the port of Vitoria. The exportation of hardwood timber from Vitoria flourished as the railroad penetrated slowly but steadily up the valley of the Rio Doce. A king's ransom in choice logs of rare varieties was loaded daily onto ships for movement to the hardwood markets of Europe and the Americas. Rapidly growing private enterprise in the valley included the establishment of sawmills and processing plants for the valuable timber. By producing and marketing lumber instead of logs, their product required less shipping space and commanded higher prices. Infant industry sprang up and flourished. The place of the mule train was taken by the steam train for long-haul transportation. Far up the line across the high inland plateau and on toward the interior, the new right-of-way was lengthened toward its ultimate goal of precious iron. Year by year, the work had been pushed ahead relentlessly. 10,000 men had contributed their sweat and toil to the empire-building aspirations of the British enterprisers. Despite broiling heat, torrential rainfall, and thousands of seemingly insurmountable difficulties, the rails had been thrust section by section through jungles, across malaria-infested swamplands, around mountains, across 1,000 vagrant streams, but always onward, onward to the interior, on to Kauai Mountain. 600 kilometers of steel, creating and supporting a score of thriving cities, serving a vast and fertile area, opening to the world the massive iron deposits of Kauai Mountain. Production was scarcely underway at the outbreak of World War II, a war destined to tax the capacities of all known sources of iron. The eyes of the world were focused on Brazil. Brazil with its 15 billion tons of raw iron ore, with its Kauai Mountain deposits now accessible by rail. But alas, the hand-hewn railroad proved sadly inadequate for increasingly heavier tonnages of iron ore. Deterioration was rapid along the entire system. Schedules were disrupted by frequent washouts and rock slides. Derailments became an almost daily occurrence. Traffic became badly snarled, and the flow of iron ore to Victoria dwindled to a mere trickle. This in a time of international crisis. It was obvious that only a broad and bold program of railroad reconstruction could solve the problem. Hurried conferences were held between officials of the United States, Great Britain, and Brazil. The work would be done. Under a three-way agreement between these nations, a Brazilian company would be formed to acquire the mines from their British owners and to assume leadership in rebuilding the line. Money for the work would be loaned by the Export-Import Bank of Washington, D.C. The Brazilian corporation formed was known as Companhia Vale do Rio Doce, then handily nicknamed CVRD. The reconstruction job was awarded jointly to Morrison Knudsen Company, Incorporated, and the Raymond Concrete Pile Company. The joint venture was organized as Raymond Morrison Knudsen of Brazil, and informally known as RMK, with MK as the sponsor. As the new project started, engineers formed the advance units. Machete crews slashed away the dense undergrowth to clear the new path for surveying parties to lay out the course of the new railroad grade. On their heels came the big tractors equipped with bulldozers that pushed their way undauntedly through the heavy brush, ripping up the stubborn jungle grasses, uprooting trees, and beating down the heavy tropical foliage. Often the going was tough, but few obstructions stopped the stubborn onslaught of the big chattering machines. RMK was building a railroad, not merely rebuilding one. Tractor-scraper combinations followed closely, cutting and filling, building the grade to a uniform level. Completed sections of the new portions of rail bed were laid smooth and straight, ready for track and ballast. RMK supervisors worked hand in hand with Brazilian officials of CVRD in laying out the rush order program, and the work proceeded under direction of some 65 RMK superintendents and engineers, picked for their past performance in railroad construction work. As the new right-of-way was cleared and graded, Brazilian trackmen, many of whom had taken part in the construction of the original Vitória-Minas Railroad, made new and startling progress under North American supervisors, and the line went forward at a rate that seemed little short of miraculous to the local residents. Few railroads can boast of using select hardwood ties to support their rails. Yet with no other wood available in this section of Brazil, the choice was simple. The hard timbers, each weighing upwards of 100 pounds, were hand-sawed largely by private residents of the localities in which they were used. As the work progressed inland, RMK headquarters and shops were moved from Vitória to the interior town of Governador Valadares, midway point along the line of construction. The construction camp, consisting of 20 red-tiled modern dwellings, provided adequate facilities for North American families. Children of the camp took quite naturally to the new setting and entered easily into the business of just having fun. Line change operations to eliminate hazardous curves and to shorten materially the overall distance of the mines made up a large part of the work specified under the contract. Heavy earth-moving equipment selected by RMK and shipped to Brazil in mass quantities made short work of cutting giant pathways through rugged hills. Big power shovels, their steel booms swinging 20 hours a day, cut down mountains to make way for the new route of the improved railway. Fleets of modern dump trucks, diesel-powered successors of the mule carts, plied back and forth, creating massive fills, building a wider, straighter roadbed. Diesel tractors, doing in hours the work that had previously taken weeks, were busy at scattered points all along the line. The broad valley of the Rio Doce echoed to the roar of mighty motors. Solid rock formations that had stymied the original builders of the Vitória-Minas Railway and had forced them to follow a winding path of least resistance through the rough country held no terrors for RMK forces whose blasting powder, monstrous loading equipment, and diesel-driven trucks either cut away the mountain or filled up the yawning void to build this shorter, faster right-of-way. Dozens of bridges were erected across the many streams tributary to the Rio Doce along the 600-kilometer stretch. Thousands of tons of steel beams and girders were imported for this purpose. The imposing steel and concrete structures erected under skilled RMK bridge technicians were built to withstand the pounding of faster-moving ore trains laden with cargoes of virtually pure metallic iron. Concrete foundation structures, heavily reinforced with steel rods, were installed for all bridge piers and abutments. Brazilian workers, tutored under RMK supervisors, took quickly to even the more specialized phases of this work, duly proud of their construction learning. Concrete pouring operations were speeded by modern cranes swinging heavy bucketfuls of the masonry mixture. Sheet steel piling, driven to bedrock, made excellent forms for the rising bridge foundations. Sand and gravel to be used as ingredients of concrete were hauled as needed to the various bridge sites by new railroad side dump cars. Modern machines from the States accelerated every phase of the work. Largest of more than a score of major bridges erected was the Santo Antonio span across the Santo Antonio River near the town of Mackay, some 420 kilometers from Vitoria. This bridge, supported by large concrete piers sunk by the caisson method, replaced the hazardous structure of an earlier period. Two major railroad tunnels drilled through mountains of solid granite by RMK tunnelmen improved the routing of trains through the high country between Vitoria and the town of Colatina, 150 kilometers inland. These tunnels eliminated miles of winding road through deep canyons and the constant danger of earth slides and track washouts that had kept the original line through the mountains in a constant state of disrepair. Before relocation of the right-of-way, the wood-burning locomotives had been forced to fight heavy upward grades and sharp curves over the high summit of the coastal mountain range. The new grades were reduced to less than 1% maximum, and curves from 17 to less than 7 degrees maximum. On the old Vitoria-Minas Railway, scores of small steel bridges had proved hazardous to traffic and heavy ore. In a country where tropical rainfall created thousands of small canyons and ravines, the problems of bridging these by feasible methods were of prime importance. With the new heavy earth-moving machines, these bridges were being eliminated and replaced by large earth fills covering huge corrugated steel drain pipes, ensuring greater safety and stability. The Brazilian workers, numbering more than 2,500 at the peak of operations, seemed inspired by the tempo of construction. Many of the more mechanically minded became adept operators of the massive steel monsters. And there were plenty of jobs for others in their well-experienced hand methods of earth moving. Drilling, blasting, and removing great barriers of solid rock never ceased to be fascinating to the young Brazilians. Equipped with modern drilling machinery, they proved to be valuable workmen in pushing the job forward toward completion. Meanwhile, in the wake of the heavy equipment, track crews continued driving the rails forward over newly constructed portions of the line and giving added support and ballast to existing sections, raising the rails, leveling the track, inserting new ties. In general, putting the line in proper shape to carry more and greater cargoes of iron ore to help satisfy a universal demand for more steel. As section after section of the new and rehabilitated portions of the new line were readied for heavy traffic, railway schedules between the thriving towns of the Long Valley became markedly improved. Timetables for the shipment and delivery of increasingly larger cargoes of iron ore and heavy freight were materially speeded month by month. A program to expedite production at Cowley Mountain was launched by CBRD engineers. A conveyor system running from high up on the mountain had been installed to carry the ore by belt to a truck loading terminal midway down the long slope. Everything was being put in readiness for a vast increase in the excavation, shipment, and delivery of ore to the port of Vitoria. A fleet of large diesel-powered trucks was added to the list of production equipment at work at Cowley Mountain, and tonnages delivered to the loading platforms increased week by week. Hundreds of new railroad dump cars were added to the Vitoria-Minas line. The day of real up-to-par by. Ore trains were on the move. Trains greatly increased in length due to the reduction in difficult grades along the route, the elimination of slow-down curves, and the general betterment of the system wound their way in increasing numbers down the long valley of the Rio Doce toward Vitoria. The vast metallic wealth of Cauê Mountain, locked for centuries among the jungle-ridden mountains of the Brazilian interior, began flowing down to the sea in constantly growing quantities for transshipment to the ore markets of the world. Mile after mile of fast, well-ballasted track, replacing the hazardous and deteriorated line built by mule cart contractors and hand labor, contributed mightily to the tremendous increase in ore deliveries. At Vitoria, the rumble of ore spilling into the holds of ocean-going vessels continued day and night. The big ore docks began around-the-clock operation. Ships from the world's principal ports of call on regular schedule began plowing the sea to and from this bustling harbor. The Vitoria-Minas Railway Reconstruction Project, although launched as a wartime measure, long will serve the peace and amity of the progressive peoples of the Western Hemisphere. The men of Raymond Morrison Knudsen have considered it their privilege, in the good neighbor spirit of the United Americas, to assist the forward-looking and forward-acting government of Brazil to open its immense storehouse of interior resources and feed them into the channels of world commerce.